November 13th, 2005. Heartbreak rips through the world of professional wrestling and sports entertainment upon learning of the death of Eddie Guerrero. Eddie entertained fans for nearly 2 decades with his lightning-quick, high-flying in-ring style paired with his charisma and his infectious personality. Turning his life around after hitting rock bottom, Guerrero would go on to have great success in WWE, becoming the 31st man to hold the prestigious WWE Championship. All told, it looked like his story would have a happy ending. Instead, his was a death so sudden and so tragic it shook the foundation of wrestling to its core. And 13 years later, we still look back at what we lost and what might have been. Above all else, Eddie's death was a reminder to us all. Life is precious and fleeting, and it's important that we show our love to those we love while they're still here on Earth, and to treat each other with respect.
Hang in there! Mr. White! Mr. White!
A lesson WWE took to heart very quickly. Even before the sanitized days of the PG era, it's hard to believe that anyone in WWE would approve a single segment, much less a recurring one, that trivializes and satirizes things as serious as depression and suicide. It's even harder to believe when you consider how soon this segment took place after the shocking high-profile death of someone within their own company. But when it comes to World Wrestling Entertainment, nothing is that hard to believe. So I guess it's no shock that Vince McMahon okayed the Lunchtime Suicides. The series, named for its noontime release every Thursday on WWE.com, tells the continuing story of former referee Tim White trying to kill himself. That's pretty much all there is to it. There's no subtle nuance, there's no grand story arc, there's barely even a payoff. Just a dude trying to kill himself in the name of comedy to drive up web traffic. Just the thing you want to sit down and eat lunch to. First, we must talk about the man at the center of all this. Tim White, a long-standing member of the WWE staff, got his first break in the mid-1980s as a part-time referee, but mostly working as the handler for Andre the Giant. It was Tim who handled Andre's day-to-day business, like travel and lodging arrangements, and to also rein in the big man during the occasional night out. White spent several more years as a referee until Judgment Day in May of 2002, when he was the ref for a Hell in a Cell match between Triple H and Chris Jericho. During the match, White got slammed into the cell wall and suffered a shoulder injury that would ultimately force him into retirement from officiating. Fast forward to December 18th, 2005, the Armageddon pay-per-view in Providence, Rhode Island. In that show's main event, The Undertaker faced Randy Orton in a Hell in a Cell match. Naturally, WWE spent a lot of the build hyping up the dreaded cell and how it can shorten a man's career. Now, up until this point, the mythos surrounding the dangers of the cell was always focused on the wrestlers, Shawn Michaels, Mick Foley, The Undertaker, and so forth, but this is the first time they shed light on what could happen to the third man in the ring. After a 2-on-1 match where Bobby Lashley beat the team of William Regal and Paul Burchill,
Can he nail it? Can Nash Gillespie nail it?
we were taken to the nearby Friendly Tap, a bar that was owned by White at the time and the site of some occasional mischief on programming over the years. It was White's first on-air appearance since his retirement, and backstage interviewer Josh Matthews wanted to know what was up.
I've been in pain for 2.5 years. I took it out on everyone I know. And then the other medical problems start. Irritable bowel syndrome.
You can tell this segment was catered to Vince, since to him, poop jokes are a license to print laughter. At the end of the scene, a despondent White walks off screen to conclude his downward spiral.
Come on, please, stop! Don't.
This segment aired 33 days after Eddie Guerrero died. Taz, what are your thoughts on what we just saw?
But did we just see what I think we just saw?
Irritable bowel syndrome.
This guy got it. Now, on its own, one viewing of this skit should have been enough for fans to immediately question the mental well-being of those in charge of the largest wrestling entity in the United States. The timing alone makes this scene no bueno, but even if Eddie hadn't died 1 month earlier, most people would probably scratch their heads at it. Forget the fact this sort of thing didn't need to air at all, but if it had to happen, once was enough. But somehow, someway, this was not the last we would see of Tim and Josh in this setting. A few weeks after Armageddon, Josh presented Tim White as alive and gloomy as he was before. It turns out that White had actually dropped his gun on the bar and shot himself in the foot. So everything's cool now.
Mr. White, please don't take that. Mr. White, that's not wise. Please don't take that.
Comedy! And on it went, and boy did it go on. From January to mid-April of 2006, somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 weeks, WWE.com released a brand spanking new video every Thursday at noon chronicling the wild and wacky adventures of the suicidal referee and the dim-witted interviewer watching it all happen. The structure of the videos, which rarely went longer than a minute, was always the same. A bright-eyed, fresh-faced Matthews would welcome the viewers, recapping everything that had gone on the past few weeks.
You've gone as far as to use a shotgun, a noose. You even dropped a toaster into a bathtub full of water while you were standing in it.
That doesn't sound right. Let me fix that.
And no one has come closer to death than the man joining me right now.
Okay, that sounds much more like him. In each video, Tim would show off his latest tool of self-destruction as Josh would naively ask what it was for.
Oh, Mr. White, is this part of your therapy? Water healing? I've actually heard of this. Oh, I get it, Mr. White. You're gonna put the tape on the ground and show me a line that you'll never cross again. This is so great. Mr. White, what's that? Some sort of new necklace I don't know about? Oh, Mr. White, tell me you just forgot to shave.
Only for it to finally dawn on Josh what's about to happen, causing him to utter his famous line.
Mr. White, that's definitely not wise. Oh, Mr. White, that's not wise. Mr. White, that's not wise. Mr. White, that's not wise. Mr. White, that doesn't sound wise. No, Mr. White, this isn't wise.
Everyone knows the best sitcoms in history always have a character with that classic catchphrase, and when you line up Josh Matthews' line with some of the all-time greats, I think it stacks up pretty well.
One of these days, pow, right in the kiss. Dynamite!
Kiss my grits! You got it, dude.
It's gonna be legend. Wait for it. Dairy. Bazinga!
Oh my God, Mr. White, that wasn't wise.
Then came the deaths. Suffocation, hanging, electrocution, drowning, a hired gunman. If there was a way to kill yourself, old Timmy had it covered. But he was either really bad at taking his own life, or he was cursed with infinite respawns, because he just kept coming back week after week after week to punish himself and therefore the viewers further. And these weren't just some wacky cartoon deaths either. Mr. White really sold us the agony with some authentic, visceral sounding noises.
Mr. White! Mr. White! Mr. White!
Comedy! After a while, I guess the people in charge of this project ran out of funny ways for Tim to off himself, since at one point they simply repeated the gun premise from Armageddon but with absolutely no setup. But the penultimate episode was the first one to end without White trying to end it all.
Well, join me next week where this all began, at the Friendly Tap, for a celebration of life.
That should have been a huge red flag for Josh. In wrestling, there's no such thing as a celebration that goes off without a hitch.
Whoa! Jim Cornette, the Rock and Roll Express!
Save the winner.
Randy Orton was in the cake!
Sure enough, the series finale proved that classic law of wrestling to be true. After a final montage of all the great times the two had had together, old T-Dubs does what I guess anyone would do after being harassed by Josh Matthews for 3 whole months.
Josh, that was not wise.
Comedy! There are some fans out there who want the Attitude Era to come back, but may find it uncomfortable when WWE occasionally pushes the envelope today. There's a counter mentality that if you want wrestling to be hip and mainstream again like it was 20 years ago, then no topic should be off limits. And while I will admit there is some validity to that argument, as someone who has seen 2 of my friends take their own lives in the 12 years I've been involved in the wrestling business, I posit the theory that stuff like this does not make wrestling fun or cool to watch. There's the obvious point that there's something supremely fucked up about the website of a publicly traded company posting a recurring video segment like this at all, but there's so much more to analyze about how bad and tasteless this is. The closest thing I can compare this to is Kenny from South Park. That character is well known for dying several excruciating deaths, yet always coming back the following episode with no explanation. That was an entertaining running gag. But aside from the fact that South Park is a cartoon and WWE is a live-action program featuring human beings who ostensibly play a version of themselves, the key difference is that Kenny's deaths were always the result of some comedy of errors, something happening to him. Meanwhile, Tim White's near-death experiences were always by his own hand. After a while, you'd think someone would step in and try and help the poor bastard, but how could anyone do that when they're so busy dancing around what's actually going on?
WWE official Tim White attempted to, well, end it all. Tim's depression has gotten the best of him lately, causing some very close calls. Over the last several months, I've been interviewing a very depressed man. Wait a second, Mr. White, this isn't part of your grand scheme to end it all, is it?
And keep in mind, after that first skit at Armageddon, this whole thing was an online exclusive. That means anyone who just watched TV and pay-per-view and didn't touch the website may have had no idea this story was still going on. For all they knew, Tim White really did make his last appearance at Armageddon 2005, walking out of frame to shoot himself. I can't decide which experience is more messed up for the fans. For all my gripes with it, there are obviously some folks who got a kick out of the videos, and even I'll admit they weren't totally without merit. Josh Matthews did well as the optimistic, if clueless, straight man to White's antics, and seeing himself for Tim now and then was pretty funny as well. And I'll give credit to Mr. White himself, who at least committed to the act and seemed to enjoy the role he was given. I've read a couple interviews in the years since that he thought the series was great. Dave Lagana, who wrote the first couple episodes before handing it off to another writer, has said that he enjoyed the videos as well.
Like, they were actually, if you go watch them, they're actually pretty funny. People hated them.
I'm willing to admit there is some comedic value in a character who's totally inept at committing suicide. I once wrote a character who fit that exact description as part of a scriptwriting project in theater class in high school, but at least that scene ended on a positive note when he was visited by the ghost of his old college roommate. I'm rambling. The point here is, in this series, there is no redemption for White. There is no recovery for him, unless you consider murder an upgrade from suicide. I guess the message here is, if you're depressed, don't take your own life, take someone else's. Happiness awaits! The biggest issue here is humor often needs context, and considering the topic and the setting they were in, this was a bad look. How much humor can be mined from a character like White's in an industry that's been plagued with premature death, where many of those instances are from actual suicide? None of those men and women are coming back the next week for more wacky hijinks. I can't imagine many friends or family members or fans of those lost were slapping their knees when this was going on. To me and to many others, this whole thing came off as impossibly tone deaf to what was going on in their own business. I'd like to think this whole thing would get Vince McMahon's fixation with on-air deaths out of his system, but it was not meant to be. Less than 2 years later, with the memory of Eddie Guerrero's death still fresh in fans' minds, the chairman would take part in a storyline that began with his own fictional demise, an angle that had to be scrapped when one of his own wrestlers did the unthinkable. Sometimes karma can strike in unusual places. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.